Let's get started painting our croquis with watercolor. First, let's transfer our favorite croquis to our watercolor paper. Just in case you don't know how to do this, you are simply going to trace your favorite croquis that you already drew and make sure you have plenty of lead on that paper. Then you're going to take the tracing paper, flip it over so the lead side is facing the watercolor paper, and then you're simply going to rub. I'm rubbing with the back of a gel pen. You can tape it in place if you want to, or you can simply hold your tracing paper down like I'm doing with my fingers. Erase any unwanted markings. Up next, we are simply going to draw in the details of our garment. Now we want to mix the paint. I mix several colors to make one color. So for this green/blue, I'm going to mix several shades of green and blue. Now we are going to paint from our left side. For us, that is going to be the shadow side. So starting on each section of our garment, we're going to use the left side of our garment first as our starting point. Notice that we are starting with very small sections. So I'm not painting the full length of the sleeve, for example. I'm painting only about 1 inch length at a time, so the paint doesn't have time to dry, because we don't want a striped effect. We want it to feel like fabric. We simply want it to be darker on that left side. Now, as we get closer towards the armhole seam, there's just less paint on the brush, and that's why it'll appear lighter. So you want to make sure you start on the left where there's the most paint. When you touch any part of the right side of that area, it will be lighter automatically because there's just less paint. All right, did you also notice that I'm not painting the full area completely green? You want to leave white spaces. That just means that you just pick your brush up off of the page sometimes. It doesn't matter where, but you do want to leave that white space so that there will have the feeling of movement and light bouncing back. So, did you notice that I cleaned off my brush with water? I didn't dry it. I just scrubbed the brush on the bottom of the container and started to dab at the paint that was left to dilute it. This way, I am painting those edges of where I just left off and blotting at it so that they fade away. That is really important. So just dip your brush into the water, scrub it on the bottom of your water container, wipe it on the side of your water container, and now it's wet but not dripping, and you can use that to touch the paint you already put down, but only in certain areas that you want to make softer. And now here I'm just using dirty water so that I can soften the inside, which is the right side here of my underarm. And that is just a very light color. So remember, left side for us is the shadow, and as we move to the right, that's close to the light source. Now we just repeat the process. We add more color on our left. Once the color is down with one pass of the brush, that's called a stroke, Then we're going to clean off some of that color if we need to, and we'll dab at it and push the left side of the color over to the right, and so it'll naturally fade out. And we're going to repeat this over and over and over. Notice there's an elbow bend and there's a Z shape. So whenever you have an elbow, so like a sleeve at the elbow, it's going to have a Z shape because the elbow bends and the fabric is going to wrinkle. You'll also notice that at a waist and different places on clothes. So those are called pull lines, and we'll deal with those as well. We want that Z shape to be darker. So you'll notice we're going to add color there too. That is going to be the darker tone, which is basically that first time around color, and we're not going to dilute it as much. So elbow bend and waist bend and sometimes the knee or the back of the knee, depending on what the garment is doing. Those areas create pull lines, and we need to have that Z shape or that diagonal shape so that we can mimic the fabric wrinkling. All right, now notice I skipped over that armhole seam, just a 1/16 of an inch, so not much, but you want to leave that white space, so don't even touch it, so that you have that sliver of a seam, and then we can go back and lightly paint over it, but we need it at first to be completely not painted, so completely white space. Now you're going to notice that I am using that same concept. I'm just repeating it on the chest. So what we did on the arm for that sleeve area, now we're doing on the bodice where our chest area is. We want to have a little bit of a shadow under the bust because it sticks out, so it comes forward and casts a shadow for what is underneath. So make sure that you have that smile shape underneath the bust, and then we're going to soften it with just dirty water. So when I say dirty water, we dip that brush into the water container and just wipe it on its side so that the water is still on the brush but not dripping wet, and a little bit of leftover paint is still on the brush. And once again, remember, there's white spaces. I am not covering in everything completely flat, and that is necessary for your illustrations to jump off the page. You need to let it breathe, and it needs that white space for the light to move around and bounce. Okay, so for your neckline, very, very light touch because you want a fine line. So make sure you dip just the tip of the brush into the color and then start to create that line for the edge of your neckline. And once again, we will soften it later, but you have to put the color down first, and then we'll soften it by cleaning off that brush in the water and dabbing at it so that the line at the neckline will then be softer. the whole thing all over again. Everything is going to be darker because now we've placed the first layer and now we're going to go with the second layer. We call them passes. So we already did the first pass, now we're going to do the second pass. All right, now let's get into those pull lines that we were talking about. P-U-L-L, and then L-I-N-E-S is how you spell it. So pull lines are the wrinkles that your clothing makes because as you are moving with that fabric, it's naturally going to wrinkle. So pull lines are usually diagonal shapes or a letter Z shape, and pull lines come any place where there's that movement and that bending of the fabric. So for us, we're going to focus on the crotch area for this mini dress. We're going to focus on that waist, and of course you have the elbow bend. So that is where we will put the pull lines. And now that we put the pull lines in place, just wipe off your brush on the bottom of your water container so that it's wet but not soaking. And then we're gonna knock down some of the pull lines. So we put the color in. Now we have a wet brush, slightly wet, and we are going to soften the pull line so that it can start to blend and become a part of the fabric. Now you're gonna need to let this whole thing dry and repeat the process again, so that would be a third pass. Maybe it would also need a fourth pass, but each pass has to completely dry before you begin the next. And the more you add the layers, the more rich and full the colors are, and the more the shadows pop out. So it's up to you how deep you want to go, how dark you want your layers, but wash, rinse, repeat is basically what is happening from this point forward. All right, I think you got that concept down pretty well. I would go back in after everything dried and dilute the elbow bend. I would knock that down a little bit with some dirty water so that it's not so harsh, as well as I would add more layers. But for now, I'm gonna move on. I think you get that concept. You're starting to see that dimension pop out. And this is a very beginning technique. So this is for a level 1 person who's entry level to the process. So you should be really proud of yourself for having such dimension and depth already at this point. All right, now let's draw in some hair. We're gonna use combination of smiles and frowns, and we are basically going to have a wave. It's gonna be uneven and it will feel kind of natural, but also still very put together. She's gonna be snatched. So you see I'm switching off with smile, frown, and parenthesis shapes basically. So go on ahead, follow along, and draw it with me. All right, so now we are gonna erase the head so that the hair is on top. So just the top of the crown of the head is what we're erasing next. Okay, next, let's mix some hair color. I'm gonna do a dark hair, so it'll be browns and blacks that I'm mixing, but you can feel free to mix up whatever color you like. And we're gonna paint in the same way, starting with parenthesis shapes on the left side. This time we'll have several parenthesis shapes because it's hair. We want it to feel like strands of hair. So it'll be several strands, and we start on our left side and we will move over towards the light. And remember, we're still doing each section at a time. So we're not going all the way from the top of the head to the bottom of the hair with one stroke. We're only doing 1/2 inch long sections at a time. So very small sections in terms of length from top to bottom. And we're just gonna repeat. So for the white space on the hair, I'm skipping in between each section so that I have parenthesis shapes, and then I skip a little bit of space and then I start again. So notice it starts at the top of the head and then you make your parenthesis shape. It's only about 1/2 inch long. And then we're skipping down after you make several of those in one row. We skip down and we do a second row, and we skip down again and do a third row, etc. So this is my brown with black mixed in, and then once I'm ready, I will do another layer when the brown layer dries, and it'll be more black, and that will be shorter strokes. So just get ready for that. Notice that we are painting in the way the hair would be combed. So on the left side, we are coming around from the scalp, and we make a parenthesis shape that faces slightly towards the right. So that's what's happening on the left side of the hair. And then as I get ready to do the right side, those parenthesis shapes start from the part and then they curve over in the opposite way, but they start from that same place. So you're essentially painting it the way that the hair would be combed and styled. And that's also the way that you would draw it. So the direction that you're starting in is from the part. Notice that the white space is in the widest part of each wave on the hair. So that is something you want to pay close attention to. So the white space, once again, is in the widest part of each of our waves. And that is how light reflects off of hair in reality. So you're able to mimic it on your fashion figures. All right, so it's been a few minutes and our brown is in place. It is not completely dry, but it's dry enough that I can add the next color. So I'm gonna layer it with the darker browns and blacks, and that's gonna give that depth. So with watercolor, you always start light to dark, And for us, remember, we start on our left side and we move toward the light source. For us is on the right side of our paper. Okay, here we are adding in our black. Remember, because it's darker, it could easily take over, so very light touch. Gently touch the tip of your paintbrush into the color and then very lightly touch your paper so that you have very thin lines, and they should be shorter because this is the darker and it's going to be at the root and the shadow parts. It's important to know that when you are adding this layer, you're going to start filling in some of the white spaces, but don't take away the white space completely, and you can have some flyaways. So when I say you're going to fill in the white space, you're just extending the lines longer each time, but they're very thin lines. And as you extend the lines longer, it fills up the color on the paper even more, so we won't have as much white space. But don't make the mistake of making very, very thick lines, because then you'll completely get rid of the white space. And we want the hair to feel like real hair, and those are very thin lines that we need to use to get that effect. Okay, let's add a little bit of face. Since we were not focusing on it, we did not draw it and transfer it initially, but hey, why not? Let's do it. Once again, to make this face, we are using that ever famous smile and frown combination. But feel free to do whatever face you'd like. Now we're gonna add brown colored pencil, and that's gonna give the difference between the soft brush and the colored pencil is gonna give a line that is more noisy and it'll feel a little bit thicker. So brown colored pencil, and you may as well grab your black one because the black colored pencil is gonna be next. We're gonna add a few of our lines with this black colored pencil in the same exact way, and that'll do it for this tutorial. I will see you in class next time. Until then, happy sketching.